All right. Hello. I think we're off. So it's 2023, and so in this year I thought that maybe it'd be a good change of pace to change how I'm doing production. So instead of doing these documentary style YouTube edits, I'm going to just try to present information and just go ahead and talk over the content and try to make it a little bit more lively. I mean, eventually I'd like to turn this into a call-in show of some sort where you join me on Google Meet or some other platform, but we broadcast the discussions. And anyways, as you go from episode to episode, this would just be a continuation of discussing whatever's going on. So I don't really want it to be a newsy sort of show. Rather just talk about things that I find interesting on the internet, more specifically on the YouTubes, the Yahtubes, and then maybe, as time goes on, continue to produce the documentaries that I've been doing the previous year. So with that said, let's begin. And you're always welcome to come visit me on lindsayfilm.com, where I put most of the documentary sort of stuff. And you can check it out anytime you want. Oh, lovely. And yeah, so basically I try to catalog everything on Lindsay Film, but everything's backed up on Rumble. I was maintaining a Facebook page for some time, but Facebook has become kind of problematic. And then I started moving towards just kind of dialoguing most of my stuff with Telegram. But anyways, let's begin. So I queued up some stuff I wanted to talk about today. Currently, we're talking about. Oh, and by the way, you could also check out my Substack. So more notable posts I'll probably be putting there, or putting an audio version on the podcast or the documentaries in post form. So I'm hoping to build that one up, but who knows? We'll see as the year goes on. This is one of my resolutions, is to switch up format. It's kind of a mix between reaction videos, but not really. It's more just presenting, and then hopefully getting people to call in and discuss things. But anyways, the big news today was, let me see here, was the Facebook files. Let's see here. Let's see what they're talking about.
Authorization for children to receive.
What's on your radar today, Robbie?
Well, Brianna, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention played a direct role in policing permissible speech on social media throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And I obtained confidential emails that show Facebook moderators were in constant contact with the CDC and routinely asked government health officials to vet claims relating to the virus, mitigation efforts such as masks and vaccines. And I'm going to show some of these never-before-seen emails. What they help prove is that the federal government shaped the rules of online discussion in unprecedented and unnerving ways during the pandemic. Now, this has become much more obvious over the past few months, of course, following Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter. Musk granted several independent journalists access to internal messages between the government and the platform's moderators, which demonstrate concerted efforts by various federal agencies, including the FBI, the CDC, and even the White House, to convince Twitter to restrict speech. These disclosures, which have become known as the Twitter files, are eye-opening. But Twitter was hardly the only...
So, without going into it too much, basically there's a new set of Facebook files that are coming out that kind of confirm or is similar to the Twitter files, where post Elon Musk buying Twitter and then releasing the information of how Twitter and the FBI and other alphabet agencies have been working together to either suppress speech, shadow ban, suppress speech, or shadow ban as we go along. Nothing new. I mean, these are really just providing the receipts for what we've been knowing for a long time. In fact, that's what I want to talk about today is the fact that we've already known all this. And in fact, it's not news. Mark Zuckerberg has personally said this multiple times on the Rogan podcast and in Congress. He was saying, yes, Facebook works with the FBI. Granted, all along, they were discussing, they were denying to what extent or how formal it was, but we've known for over a decade that this is going on long before the Senate hearings or the congressional hearings or some of the more newsy newscasts now. I think that they're just being more open about talking about this because for whatever reason, either enough time's passed or the elections have passed, so now they feel like they can talk about it. So without spending too much time here, that's basically the headline. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that while it sounds very damning and it sounds like Twitter and Facebook have been running this grand, conspiracy on everybody, it's not new. In fact, most of the news agencies or news channels, all of tech, all of social media has been doing this as well. And we've known about it for a long time. So I'm going to go through a bunch of clips here that kind of illustrate this point and just to refresh everyone's memory on how we got here. But the other thing I want to mention is to show a little sympathy towards, like, say, Jack Dorsey or Mark Zuckerberg or even Elon and other tech leaders on why they did this, because they did struggle for, I would say, 10, maybe 14 years to resist the collusion with the government on most of these subjects. I mean, all the way back to 9/11 and then the issuance of the Patriot Act, there was many lawsuits, many companies resisting this. A lot of it went on behind closed doors in FISA courts. And we only now know about it, or as this thing stuff, it would slightly leak out, but it was downplayed. A lot of times it was played up for political reason. It was also played down for political reasons. So it just depended on who was in power and who was running for government and who had control of which agencies. And I guess my bigger point is that it's not a case of wag the dog, it's the dog wagging the tail. So meaning that the government was calling the shots and the tech companies were either forced into it or some of them willingly went into it straight away. But we'll go over that as well. But it was also that through a series of legal legislation, court hearings, but behind the doors sort of stuff, they were also dragged into it. So I hope to illustrate those points so that we just don't run away with the news. But anyways, let's start off with Mark Zuckerberg, talking to Congress about what Facebook was doing internally.
Some people say that the problem is that social networks are polarizing us, but that's not at all clear from the evidence or research. Others claim that algorithms feed us content that makes us angry because it's good for business, but that's not accurate either.
The Facebook papers are more than 10,000 documents downloaded by an internal whistleblower at Facebook that really show over and over and over again how Facebook is well aware of the heart.
I've heard a lot of people say that we're optimizing for keeping people on the service. The way that we view this is that we are trying to help people have meaningful social interactions. But that's very different from setting up algorithms in order to just kind of try to tweak and optimize and get people to spend every last minute on our service, which is not how we design the company or the services.
Well, it turns.
And notice that that was in March of 2021 during the tail end, towards the about a year into the pandemic, maybe a year and a half, depending on how you count. And I would say if you go even further back, you would see that we could see all the steps as they went from being like very libertarian or wanting or saying at least that they wanted to democratize all the world's information. Google's famous for saying that their mission statement was to organize all the world's information, and there was a lot of a lot of business and startups around like, hey, let's get around the gatekeepers and media and make it a place where
Joe Rogan experience.
When we take down,
make it a place where people can broadcast and talk about whatever they want, and by democratizing information and citizen journalism through blogging, twittering, social media in general, this is a net force for good as opposed to a net force for something malicious. And here we have Mark Zuckerberg on the Joe Rogan, shortly after the Elon acquisition and the Twitter files beginning to leak out. But Mark Zuckerberg, discussing with Joe on how Facebook has been working with the FBI.
down something that we're not supposed to. I mean, that is like, that's the worst. I mean,
how
that's
do you
like
discern? Like how, say like these Christian Facebook pages. I don't know how they found out that 19 of 20 were fake. But if someone just says, I am Bob Smith, and they post as Bob Smith, and they have a photograph, but really what they're doing is trying to talk shit about Joe Biden and get people to vote Republican in the midterms. Like how do you know whether someone's real or not? Like this is the big argument with Elon and Twitter, because Elon asked Twitter, like, what percentage of your website is filled with bots? And they say 5%. And he says, I don't believe you. I think it's higher. And let's find out how you've come to this conclusion.
Yeah.
And, they're...
So sorry that I have to keep stopping and comment a little bit, but, to avoid strikes and stuff like that, since we're going to be reviewing a lot of clips, I'm going to be doing this throughout the thing. Also, it's to the format to discuss it. So one of the bigger, sticking points on the Twitter deal when Musk was proposing to buy it was that Musk was saying that, he thinks that if it's less than 5%, then the $44 billion would stand, right? Like he would buy the company for $44 billion. I think that was like a $45 per share strike price, something like that. And anyways, as they started doing due diligence, even though he waived it, he started raising questions that says, hey, it seems like that the Twitter bots might be greater than 5%, maybe as high as 20%. A lot of analysts in different ways were saying that Twitter might not be as high as 40%. So it was very debatable, and they were bringing up a lot of the SEC filings by Twitter that would claim that, this is sub 5%. And so there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of legal jargon discussing this point.
I believe they said that they just took 100 random Twitter pages and looked at the interaction, and there's some sort of an algorithm they applied to it. But how do you discern?
Yeah, so I mean, I think estimating the overall prevalence is one thing, but I think that the question of looking at a page and is this page authentic, I think that there's a bunch of signals around that. One of the things that we try to do is for large pages, we try to make sure that we know who the admin of that page is. We don't necessarily, I didn't get into this to basically judge those things. I got into this to design technology that helps people connect, right? It's like,
and that's an excellent point, right? And that's kind of what I'm saying earlier is that he started in college, right? And this became as the company became bigger and turned into a platform and went through series of waves of features and mission statements, it was evolving. But we also know that there was a lot of government intervention during this time because this was going on during the Iraq War. This is post 2001 and 9/11. And then the Afghan War, and then a whole bunch of series of things began happening where that made social media very critical to the political discussion and legislation.
It's like, and like, I mean, you could probably tell when we spent the first hour talking about the metaverse and the future of basically building this whole technology roadmap to basically give people this realistic sense of presence. It's like, that's what I'm here to do, right? So this whole thing that's like arbitrating what is okay and what is not, I obviously have to be involved in that because this is
So I'm just going to keep skipping along to the more relevant parts for copy strike reasons, but also, to keep this in fair use, to make it more of a commentary. And I don't want to spend all our time on this particular video. I got many more that I want us to go over. I'd like to get. I thought I was queued up for the FBI piece, but let's see if we can find it real quick.
A big news item that's controversial. Like there was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post.
We have that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. I mean, basically, the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. There was we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter's. What Twitter did is they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that.
So, okay, there it is. So basically, he's trying to talk about how, in a very PR-y way, I mean, he is CEO of Facebook. Like, there is a share price associated with this. So he does have to put a PR spin on these things and try to smooth this out to make it coherent. So, and this has been going on for years. So obviously, he has a way of talking about this that sounds kind of benign. But at the same time, he is admitting that, and this has been known for a couple months now, but since this aired, but they were working with the FBI. They were talking about the Hunter laptop. For a long time, you couldn't even say that on Facebook or YouTube. I mean, I know my channels got struck down for this sort of stuff. That's kind of why I went silent for about a year. Not because I didn't want to talk about this stuff or anything I do. It's just that it wasn't going to serve me well to let all my content get struck down. And so we just kind of had to let this play out and see what happened, unfortunately. And it's good to see that they're at least now bringing it up and that we can now talk about it to a degree. So I'm going to tread lightly here. But there it is. Yes, they're working with the FBI.
What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was
so I'm going to skip past this a little bit.
Also the case of armchair quarterbacking, right? Or at least Monday morning quarterbacking, I should say. Because in the moment, you had reason to believe, based on the FBI talking to you, that it wasn't real and that there was going to be some propaganda. So what do you do?
Yeah.
And then if you just let it get out there, and what if it changes the election and it turns out to be bullshit? That's a real problem. And I would have really thoroughly... Well, first of all, you're dealing with the New York Post, which is one of the oldest newspapers
skip past this for a little bit.
To be in your spot, and one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about is this, because like to be in your spot must be insanely difficult. To have, no matter what decision you make, you're going to have a giant chunk of people that are upset at you. And there might be a right way to handle it.
Because I think that it's hard for people to accept that, like, some team at Meta or that I personally am making all these decisions. And I think people should be skeptical about so much concentration around that. So that's why a lot of the innovation that I've tried to push for in governance is around things like establishing this oversight board. So that way you have people who are luminaries around expression from all over the world, but also in the U.S.
So this all sounds like PR speak. And he is, trying to smooth over this. And Joe's right. It's like a lot of people were freaking out over this. Unfortunately, the other side of this is that they were being called conspiracy theories or kooks or Alex Jones sort of folks. And so this suppressed a lot of the discussion. But again, now that we can talk about it, it's good that we have this information. This particular interview wasn't even that revolutionary or that it didn't really matter because Zuckerberg had already said this previously in congressional hearings. So let's jump over there, please. So here we go.
It's increasingly common that our systems are able to detect when there's potential issues. And over the last 4 years in particular, we've built closer partnerships with law enforcement and the intelligence community to be able to share those kind of signals. So we're doing more of that, including in the...
And that's another weird thing about Facebook. They keep talking about signals, which is like spook speak or intelligence speak, meaning that they're sorting through all this information. They're looking for a signal or some piece of information that will allow them to go zero in on something that they're looking for. The proverbial needle in the haystack. But if you ever interviewed with Facebook, which I've done a few times, even in their interviews, they talk about everything in terms of signal. They're like, so we're looking from this candidate a signal that suggests that they would have great leadership or good people management skills or a strong handle on technology. And we got some signal regarding the technology and some other signal regarding management and blah, 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 blah. And you're just going like, why are you talking like that? And it's because they're heavily working with, and then they're getting a lot of product requirements from the government. Now, granted, they don't speak about it in broad terms like that to employees, and they're probably not even speaking like that to media, but they are using coded language like signals, which suggests that these issues are coming from somewhere else. This is not, it's not even Facebook that says signals. Google, Twitter, everybody is talking about it in terms of signals.
In the case that you mentioned before, around the attempted kidnapping of Governor Whitmer, we identified that as a signal to the FBI. I think it was about 6 months ago when we started seeing some suspicious activity on our platform, and there's certainly that's part of our routine and how we operate.
Yeah, so there you have it. And just to touch on the Elon Twitter thing, here is our good friend from Twitch. Blanking on his name, but he did Justin TV, Mr. Justin TV guy that made $1 billion from Amazon. So let's let him, touch on the Twitter acquisition.
Did Elon light $44 billion on fire? Is Twitter just the billionaire's version of Fire Festival? Let's find out. Today, we're going to talk about Elon buying Twitter. My take is that Elon buying Twitter, it's like he ripped the Band-Aid off a patient and it may or may not kill it. We're kind of like seeing what happens. Maybe the billionaire version of Fire Festival. We don't know. There's a lot like what's good and what's bad about this, right? Like the good part, everybody in Silicon Valley, like every executive, every founder, they might not admit it, but they've all been looking at the bloat in Silicon Valley and the bloated headcount and saying, does this make sense? But the problem is it's endemic to Silicon Valley. So the reason is, if you think about it, there's certain companies that are very profitable in Silicon Valley, and those drive the whole ecosystem. Companies like Google, Microsoft, etc. And these companies, because they've been so profitable, they can, number one, pay huge salaries, and number two, have huge organizations. And so the most profitable...
And yeah, so just to touch on that in terms of bloat and salaries, is there's armies of engineers that are maintaining a lot of these systems. So this would be your DevOps type of people, or ops, or straight up ops. But then there's also a lot of developers who are building these things. But the way developers usually work, myself included, is you do about 6 months to 2 years on a particular project, and through attrition you either roll off onto another project and then give it over to DevOps, or let the existing team continue to develop and iterate on it. But at some point, unless it's a hugely profitable product, they get kind of sidelined and even end of life at some point if they are not generating revenue, or they become too costly to continue development if there's bigger company things to go do. So and the salaries, who knows? If we were to just jump over to levels, FYI, and let's go take a quick look at a typical engineer's salary at one of the big guys. So this is just a software engineer at, say, Google. So an L3, you're looking at about 182K with 142 base, with 30K of stock and maybe a bonus. Not too bad. That's pretty sweet. Let's look at an L5. We're now in the 350s And now you're starting to notice that the stock is really, catching up to the salary. So about half your comp is stock and bonus, right? But by the time you're an L6, a staff level software engineer, you're now looking at $500,000. Now, a lot of people don't actually get that because they don't spend 5 years at Google. They might bounce around company to company, or they might come back, boomerang back to a Google because the salaries have gotten so big. Because, that's probably from 2015 to 2020-ish. 21 and 2 during the pandemic, we were seeing some really interesting things, and that's where you're getting this big number for. But historically, I would say it's about maybe 300 or something prior to 2015. If we were to go look at, beyond that, you become a principal and you're on par with, a software engineering manager. So an L5 EM is looking at about 350. Again, the stock is a big portion of your compensation, and they can claw that back. It's part of your retention program, meaning that in order to keep you for the full year or 4 years, if you don't make the first year, you don't get the stock. And if your performance or your managers or peers give you a bad rating, you don't get the bonus. And even if you do make it into year 2, so you get a quarter of the stock, then they can claw it back on a quarterly basis, or if there's a mass layoff, then there's a lot of money that they can save off. Let's take a look at Facebook specifically, since that's who we're talking about. An M1, about $500,000. So an M1 Facebook engineer and an L6, which is usually manager level, but you could have in ICs, individual contributors at L6, even L7s and 8s. It just depends on, how the company values them. The managers is not necessarily the most powerful or has the most authority, because these are usually done in committees where you have product managers, architects, EMs, and then you have like staffs and leads on the ICs, and they're all contributing in different ways. The manager is more about people management, direction, roadmap. They work heavily a lot with product manager on roadmap. They're taking a lot of direction from directors in terms of like what their objectives are, but still they're more interested in making sure the team is working correctly, whereas your individual contributors should have a lot of depth in the code base and have strong technical expertise in that code base, or languages or frameworks, etc. Whereas the managers might start losing sight of those things as they worry more about people issues. Let's take another look. So an Apple employee at an M2, very similar. Let's throw in Microsoft's. Let's see what is 6.4. I don't understand Microsoft stuff, but it seems like they're not doing as well. It looks like you have to get up to 66 to start hitting 4. Maybe a senior director is when you start really getting it. So Microsoft's more established. They got more established lines of businesses. And so I guess you got to be a director. That seems a little odd to me. But what that highlights is that an M2 Facebook person that's a level manager too. So somebody who's actually been able to survive year 1 or 2 as a manager does well. Now they're starting to look at 800,000 to $1 million. And so, or on the Google senior manager, 700K, that's pretty crazy. And again, look, notice how their salary stays low and their stocks go up and their bonuses. And your bonuses are taxed at a higher rate than your salary is, and your stock is capital gains, which is less than your income taxes. So this gets taxed at the highest rate. This gets taxed at like, I forget what the average is, but like 36% federal and state, depending on which states you're in and which territories and stuff. And your stock is probably at 10 to 15%. And you can even give away some of your stock to avoid taxes, or if you hold your stock for a period of time and it gains value, then you have to pay taxes on the additional value that grew from when it was awarded. It's super complicated. There's a bunch of YouTube videos that describe it. Amazon's thing is even crazier. I'm not going to go into all that, but that's essentially what Justin Kahn, so Justin TV that created Twitch TV, Justin Kahn is talking about. So let's go back to Mr. Kahn.
Profitable companies kind of set the tone. And what happens is that culture trickles down to the mid-sized companies. It starts at the Metas, Googles of the world, and Microsofts. And then it trickles down to the Ubers and Twitters of the world. And then it trickles down to all the startups, right? And the reason is because, like, why should a company that is maybe much less profitable, like an Uber compared to Google, still have the same type of hiring plan as a Google? Well,
my quick answer to that, let's look at the stocks real quick. So if we take a quick look at, say, the Gulag, or, sorry, nickname, Old Habits Die Hard, we can see that on Google's 10-year at the height of the pandemic at $1.50 was hitting about $1.2 trillion. Well, no, actually, it was in the twos, but now at $95 a share, it's at $1.2 trillion. And if it keeps trending downward, I mean, it might lose trillion dollar status or fall out of the $1 trillion club. We see in Microsoft has been a nice steady growth since the 80s. If I did all time, let's see here. Yeah, since the 80s, it's had a nice growth, but the numbers that they're slinging around since 2015 to the 2020 is just crazy. And they're sitting at about 1.8, but I think for a second they touched 2 trillion. Apple's still 2 trillion. I think they're still king of the pile at the moment. And there's lots to talk about in terms of stock. I know Amazon fell out of the $1 trillion club for lots of reasons. I think some of it had to do with oil. So moving all those Amazon trucks around cost oil, was diesel and stuff like that. Plus there was a shortage on trucks and cars that drove the used car market up. And they use a lot of affiliates to run these delivery services to keep on par with FedEx or whatever. And the data centers, right? AWS, Amazon Web Services, uses a tremendous amount of energy. So they were getting hit left and right from that, plus the supply chain. So that just caused the cost of things on Amazon to go up, plus the delivery cost to go up. And so the things that were making Amazon seem like this super great business that was crushing Walmart and Costco and all the mom and pops started to work against them. So the economy of scale started to work against them. And so they kind of fell under $1 trillion. I think Jeff Bezos leaving also created some vulnerability in the stock as he focused on Blue Origin and some other stuff. Plus the divorce didn't help. Same goes for Gates, but Gates isn't involved with Microsoft. But that's okay. CRM, Salesforce, they were like a $300 billion. They came down for various reasons. Uber was never that big. I mean, it was maybe $50-60 billion, I think. I don't know. I have to look back. And this stock app doesn't retroactively shows you what the market cap was at that time, but it just shows you today's market cap. But for simplicity reasons, I think this is good for our purposes. And it's down to like 21 billion. $60 billion. So yeah, I think it did hit 100 billion at one point, but it was never a $1 trillion company. But it was a fast moving startup. And so like what Khan is saying is that, you know, whatever happens at Google or FANG, Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Netflix, etc. The acronym's kind of funny because people are referring to different companies, but usually they mean the biggest tech companies. And whatever's going on there in terms of interviewing, hiring practices, governance, technology, information sharing, whatever, usually affects all the startups. And also those startups or those mid-sized companies that recently IPO'd have to compete with the Googles and of the world and friends to retain talent. So whatever's going on at the big guys, it usually affects the other guys. But hopefully, like the unicorn startups are trying, or the recent IPOs are trying to entice people with stock options and growth. And so everything's a big gamble, right? And that's why your stock is such a big part of your compensation. And they make sure you have, like, you know, enough salary to deal with the house and stuff. But you're equally vulnerable to the legislation and the market shifts that it causes. And the idea here is that you have skin in the game, but do you? I mean, it just all kind of feels like a lottery ticket. And a lot of times, just like in crypto, you get rug pulled a bunch. And there's a lot of things to say about the stock and why that's good or bad or whatever. I just know from the technology treadmill standpoint of things, like going from, like C to C++ to Flash to PHP to Flex to Java and Go and Ruby on Rails and Python and machine learning and artificial intelligence is exhausting, and a lot of people burn out. And they don't necessarily make a 10, 20-year career out of it. And the people that do tend to specialize, and they don't necessarily stay at the big companies. And some people do at the big companies, and more power to them, but it's wicked hard. And usually they're really specialized. So that makes movement between companies harder. The people that are good at, flexible and learning new technologies will jump from here and there, or they'll be forced to move due to layoffs and reorganizations. And these companies are reorging constantly at a 6 to 9 month pace. And it's debatable if this is dead weight or not. I say it's not. I say that it's just the creative destruction that happens as a result of market forces and software that's constantly evolving, which renders a lot of existing technology obsolete. And there's a lot more to say about that, but we'll save that for other streams and talk about it. But let's continue with Justin Kahn.
It's one, part of the culture in Silicon Valley, and two, it's part of the competitive nature of Silicon Valley. It's like, if you're recruiting talent into Uber, right? Let's say they're recruiting a PM, like a group PM. That group PM is going to want to know, well, is my organization going to grow? Is my authority going to grow? And that generally manifests itself as having a bigger team, right? And so that's why you've had this cascading balloon in Silicon Valley. In addition to that, you've layered it on top of this massive overinvestment in Silicon Valley over the last 10 years. You had this really low interest rate environment. People were looking for anything that was going to grow. So you had all this dollars flowing into Silicon Valley, hundreds of billions of dollars of venture capital. And that has made it easy for people to expand their team and grow their team. Like when we were building Atrium, I hired 180 people in 2 years because I was able to raise $75 million for a business with very questionable margins. And that's just because people were investing a lot of money in a lot of things. And we were looking around and saying, oh, well, this is the price of office space. This is the price of engineers. This is just the price of operating in the Silicon Valley Bay Area. Where does that leave us? Twitter has become, over the last 10 years, they've grown to 7,400 people or something like that. And, everyone's like...
So again, sorry to keep interrupting, but I can't let this go on too long for content reasons. But anyways, so what he's going on about is that, there's huge competition for employees. And then even when they do get the said employees, notice how during the layoffs in late 22, they start doing them at 10,000 person rates, click rates, right? Elon laid off 5,000 to 7,000 people when he took over Twitter. But that didn't include the thousands that he laid off at Tesla, I believe. And a lot of in Amazon's like, we'll do 10,000, but by the way, we're going to lay off 80,000 through attrition, which is a tricky thing to say. He didn't actually lay off, or Amazon didn't actually lay off 80,000 people. What they did was they said, well, all those people working in the fulfillment centers and the data centers that naturally attrition, we're just not going to backfill their jobs. We're not going to rehire new people to replace half of them or a percentage of them. But because they have 300,000 something employees that are not necessarily engineers, I think that's roughly 70% of the company's employees, that you can get a much larger number just by not hiring people once their contracts are conclude, or they leave on to bigger other opportunities, or they burn out, or whatever the reason is. So through attrition, they were saying that they did 80,000. I suspect that part of that 80,000 there was layoffs and terminations too. They probably just rounded up the bottom 5 to 10% on performance reviews. Not saying that they actually performed poorly, but that they somehow got outcompeted by their peers, or their jobs were automated away with robots or something. And so, or they found a better deal by leasing stuff out to FedEx or UPS or other partner companies to do the jobs that they were having done manually. So, and I think I just saw Microsoft's announced 10,000. I mean, it's like hundreds of thousands of people, not just engineers, got laid off as $2 or $3 trillion of equity evaporated in the valley. And a lot of people are saying like, hey, it's going to be like 4 to 6 quarters, so somewhere mid 24 at the earliest to 25. All the companies are bracing for a massive recession. It has to do with interest rates. It has to do with inflation. It has to do with blah 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 stuff. I'll let you go to Squawk Box or some of these other places to chew the fat on that one. But essentially what they're saying is that they're going to try to lean up. And whatever the Google does, everybody else does.
Inside of looking around and like, is this necessary to run this company? And at the same time, a series of events got Elon interested in buying the company. Right? Elon's always been an avid Twitter user. Twitter, in a way, has been responsible for some of his success. So Elon has gone like Tesla stock is like the #1 meme stock, right? Elon is an amazing showman. He releases all sorts of like content on Twitter, like whether it's a humanoid robot or Cybertruck videos or doing live streams of SpaceX. You know, he had this parody news site was banned from Twitter for saying Rachel Levine, who is government.
So now we're moving on to political topics, and Elon is now addressing the censorship and also the propaganda that was being pushed through with this person. I'm not going to say their name. But yeah, now these are some of the other reasons stated in the Twitter acquisition. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. And let's kind of give Justin a few more seconds, and then we'll go on to the next video.
An official and a transgender woman said that she was man of the year.
What?
You know, which is kind of rude, but should they be able to say it? I don't know, but they were banned by the previous Twitter regimes. Now, Elon, who's a purported free speech absolutist, was like, that's fucked up. And that's when he started getting interested in buying Twitter stock. Amasses just under 10% position in Twitter secretly, and then he announces that he had it. And then earlier this spring, he says, I want to buy Twitter, and makes a tender offer for like $54.20 a share, which is just about $44 billion for the whole company. And then he's like, tries to back out of the deal and says that Twitter has a huge bot problem and the company won't announce how many bots there are, won't give him accurate data. So he's trying to like back out of it, but the company sues him to complete the deal. And then eventually he capitulates and ends up buying Twitter for $44 billion, of which $13 billion is debt. So this adds $1 billion a year of debt service to.
Yeah, so without getting into the weeds, yeah, that was a big story last year, and that translated into massive layoffs at Twitter. I'm not so sure he finishes with that.
You saw on top of Elon, you know, all of a sudden he's like a terrible capitalist. He's like against workers, you know, free speech absolutist, but it's going to allow misinformation to run rampant on the platform. You know, whatever their worst, deepest fears for the platform are, they're spreading it out all over Twitter. When Elon comes in, some people immediately start quitting. Other people get fired after they talk shit to Elon. This creates this huge wave of people online saying, oh, he's too sensitive and you can't take a joke when I'm to free speech. And other people saying, you can't insult your boss. It's fucked up. You know, they should be fired. But
yeah, so that goes on for a while. So let's move on to the next one. And
Insane.
And here we have Elon moving into Twitter with the kitchen sink. Ha ha ha. And and then there was a massive. Yeah, he was just doing burn and turn. He was firing dudes left and right. But that's normal with a reorg. Just so you know, like whenever you reorg and you swap out the director or the VP or something, usually he comes in with his own people. So there's some layoffs there. And then whatever their pet project or their fiefdom was, they start dismantling that and put their own people in, or they start reducing headcount in order to hire more people. So it's not necessarily that they're reducing the jobs permanently. They're just reorganizing. And, I remember at a bunch of companies, I'm not going to say who, you could set your clock to it. Every 6 to 9 months is a reorg. And these reorgs meant, you almost didn't want to be in management, because if you were in management, you're probably the first one to go. And then the people, the engineers and stuff, they would be repurposed, or the teams would be divided up. Some services would be deprecated or end of life and turned off, but the engineers would roll on to the next thing, provided that you survived the layoff. But again, it was like every 6 to 9 months. You could set your watch by it, and so like all year long, if you didn't like your manager, you're like, I'm so ready for this reorg, let's do it. So it's not even necessarily a bad thing. But in the Twitter thing, I think a lot of people got complacent.
Sink.
Let's start with the kitchen sink. Hopefully our wonderful...
Let's try that
Let's
again.
start with the kitchen sink.
Let's start with the kitchen sink. Hopefully our wonderful producers are going to put that video up on the screen. Elon Musk has arrived at Twitter's San Francisco offices. Just off Market Street, you and I know them well, Em. We had reported earlier in the day, according to sources in an internal memo reviewed by Bloomberg, that Musk is going to be walking around the corridors of this office. Staff are being encouraged to say hello to him when they see Elon Musk, and we're told he will address staff on Friday. As you said in the top of the show, the Washington Post and Bloomberg both reporting.
So in this clip, this is the All In podcast. Is this the Rubin Report?
Hey guys, look who's here.
Oh, look who.
Okay, so this is the Rubin Report doing a clip on the All In podcast. So this has David Sachs, my old boss from Yammer, and Elon Musk. And I guess Sachs and Musk used to work together as part of the PayPal mafia, which sold for like $1.6 billion to eBay back in the late, like 2005, 6? I don't know. Somewhere in that, 3, maybe 2003. Making both of them really wealthy. Even the guy, Chad Hurley, that did YouTube, and Reid Hoffman that did LinkedIn, they were part of that whole crew. Max something went and did another company or two, and then got on Disney's board. But anyways, David, in the All In podcast, it has David Sachs, Jason Calacanis that did TechCrunch with Michael Arrington, and then he also did a startup called Mahalo, which is like a visual search engine or something. And that, I don't know if it did that well, but he made money off of it. And it turned into TechCrunch, which was a big, Silicon Valley, newspaper about entrepreneurships and technology. He now does This Week in Startups. Very good show. I recommend it. But anyways, some of the friends he made during that time was David Sachs of Yammer, who also did Thank You for Smoking, the movie, Genie, and then he did Crafts Ventures. But when Yammer sold to Microsoft, it became a Microsofty. So anyways, and then Chatmoth Papatia, I think he was an early product manager at Facebook, and so he made his billions off of the Facebook stock, and he went off and did Social Capital. And then Freeberg, I don't know much about his background other than something about Google and finance, and he doesn't speak that much. But anyways, they're all buddies, and they did a podcast called All In, which I really like. I highly recommend it. And a couple of them sound like they talk to Elon a lot, and they invest in each other quite a bit. And so with Elon taking over Twitter, he has Sachs come and Calacanis as advisors. I'm sure Chatmoth gives a couple words of wisdom there. But anyways, Elon came and joined them, and shortly after the Twitter acquisition, and then they all started talking about how it was going. So let's listen.
Who it is? Oh, is it the proprietor? Hey, Sachs,
Oh, hey
I see
guys,
somebody.
look who's here.
Oh, look who it is. Oh, is it the proprietor?
The proprietor, the owner.
Twitter customer support at your service.
Zach, you spent the last 15 minutes selling your new features on the podcast. Pretty exciting.
Well, the views are like incredible. And I saw Dave Rubin already made an observation that if you look at New York Times, their views are maybe 1/10 like my views, just me as a lone tweeter. And he said that their followers are inflated by just basically buying a bunch of follower accounts.
Yeah, the views thing is huge. That's why I pushed the views, which is like actually a lot harder feature to implement than you'd think, because the sheer number of transactions per second. Like I think it sort of requires system-wide on the order of 3 million transactions a second to actually calculate the view, calculate and display the view count. FYI. Well, it's been quite a roller coaster, which obviously you've witnessed and been on the roller coaster as well.
Yes, the Dramamine. I've taken the Dramamine. It's quite up and down.
I mean, it's exciting, but I think it sort of has its highs and lows, to say the least. But overall, it seems to be going in a good direction, and we've got the expenses reasonably under control, so the company's not like in the fast lane of bankruptcy anymore. And we're releasing features faster than Twitter's history at the same time as having contained the costs and reduced the cost structure by a factor of 3, maybe.
So, yeah, there's a lot of jargon going there, but there's an interesting point about saying that Elon thought the company was going bankrupt. And how can a company be going bankrupt when it just got bought by $44 billion billionaire who's worth like $200-something billion, depending on how you count, or which day of the week it is? I think the issue here is that Twitter didn't necessarily have to make money because of the Twitter files. They were... So they were working on the... They were working on... if you're working with the government, you don't necessarily have to make money. It's like that scene in Armageddon. Let me see if I can find it, because it's really funny. Armageddon tax scene. So it's like the scene in Armageddon where the government's like, hey, there's this asteroid coming to the Earth, and it's going to smash into us any time now. And anyways, we went to the patent office. We found a drill bit because it's the best one, supposedly. And obviously that's why we casted Bruce Willis to lead up this movie. But anyways, in the scene, they're like, hey, we want you to go up to the asteroid on a rocket or a spaceship and then go blow it up with a nuke with your drill bit, but you got to drill it into the nuke to split it up in half. And he's like, that sounds really dangerous, and how dare you use our patents and rebuild our drill bit without our consent? That's a patent infringement. And they're like, yeah, well, we're the government. We're going to save the Earth. Don't worry about it. You're welcome. Anyways, we need you to do it. And then Bruce Willis and friends are like, well, if we do this for you, we don't want to pay taxes. And then they had a bunch of other demands. So in the Twitter case, it's kind of similar, where they're saying like, okay, we need this intelligence. We need to find the terrorists globally and domestically. And we can't tell everybody about it. And we're going to force you to do this anyways. So maybe you don't have to pay so much taxes. It's not like we don't know who you are. It's not like we don't know where you live or where you sleep. But you have some information we want. And by the way, this goes for Yahoo, Google, Apple, and friends. And so now that you're providing a data service, we're going to hook you up. This is called the Friends and Family Plan. But anyways, let's watch the Armageddon thing. Kind of spells it out. This is 2001.
For the mob. 2 of these guys have done serious time.
Look, they're the best at what they do.
So am I. And I'm not so optimistic. We spend $250 billion a year on defense. And here we are. The fate of the planet is in the hands of a bunch of retards I wouldn't trust with a potato gun.
So what's the verdict?
They'll do it. They've made a few requests, though.
Such as?
Yes. A few things here.
Sorry, I gotta keep pausing it because of the algorithm thingy.
Ripped off his record.
56 tickets in 7 states.
I'll tell him, Oscar. I got it.
Okay.
Noonan's got 2 women friends that he'd like to see made American citizens, no questions asked. Max would like you to bring back 8-track tapes. Not sure if that's gonna work, but let's see what else. Chick wants at the White Horse.
White House. White House.
White House. Yeah, he'd like to stay in the Lincoln bedroom of the White House for the summer. Stuff like that.
Sure, I think we can take care of some of that.
Harry,
Yeah, algorithm. Let me pause it for a second. So, okay, now let's try it again.
Yeah, one more thing. None of them want to pay taxes again. Ever.
The reason why I show this, and because I mentioned it, but the reason is that like a lot of the movies, because Hollywood's in on it, and the media companies are in on all this sort of stuff, and for whatever reason, they have to tell you. They want to tell you. Like maybe it's bragging or ego. I don't know. They're like, we need to tell you about all the cool stuff we've been doing and how we kind of get people to go along because it makes for good movies. But so. A lot of times these movies kind of cue you in to what's going on. There was another good scene or a good movie, Wag the Dog. And again, they're just trying to clue you in on what's going on. So it's not like any of this is new. This is all like...
Now, Washington's top spin doctor.
We can distract the press for 11 days till the election. I think we got a chance.
Has an idea.
We can't afford a war.
We're gonna have the appearance of a war. But he can't pull it off without Hollywood's top producer.
Do I know you? We have some mutual friends in Washington. Why come to me? We want you to produce.
You want me to produce your war?
Not a war, it's a pageant. We need a theme, a song, some visuals. We need, it's a pageant.
New Line Cinema presents.
How close are you to this?
What do you want the kid to say?
All the spectacle.
I know we're all concerned for the president.
I know we're all concerned for the president.
I know that we are all concerned for the president.
He didn't sell the line.
All the drama.
The president's gonna go.
Yeah, so what year was Wag the Dog? Wag the Dog. Release date. Pardon my spelling. 97, right? They've been doing this forever. And it's kind of what's funny about it, but it's also very telling. And I only pointed out, usually when I do my documentaries, I'm pointing all these things out or I'm splicing them in for either comic relief or just to weave the difference between La La Land, Los Angeles and Hollywood, and reality, where these things go hand in hand. This is a big production. It's a big pageant. And so it's no surprise that tech was involved in a lot of the stuff. So here's Elon again.
Maybe 4. So... the verified is obviously that's huge. It's a revenue stream as well as a means of identifying of like knowing that it's a real person and not a bot or a troll situation. Having the organization affiliation, which I suspect you talked about, that was an idea of David's that was great to have organization affiliation. So you can know that somebody is an actual professor at Stanford, or that this particular handle is actually Disney, not someone simply putting "I work at Disney" in their bio.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot going on here, and I'm a little worried about Elon because it really seems like he's going against the machine, and a lot of times you could point at many things where it sounds like he's with the machine. So this really tells me that maybe there's factions in the machine that are fighting over control. So maybe there is autonomy and stuff like that. I don't really know. It's not like everyone is forced to do everything. There might be a lot of happy coincidences and stuff. But what this tells me is that there's a lot of people that are that were coerced into this, and now they're either speaking up or pushing back a little bit, but at the same time, there's others that are going with it full force. And this hasn't resolved itself yet. It's a 10, 20-year thing that seems to be raging on, so I don't really know if it's going to go away. Just as a throwback, here's some footage of Elon Musk. Oh, this one's kind of funny.
Why don't we...
Yeah.
Off.
I do think we've failed in a couple of ways, and I want to admit that.
Failure comes with a big penalty. You're fired.
Why don't we...
Yeah.
Off.
I do think we've failed in a couple of ways, and I want to admit that.
Failure comes.
So that's super funny. And this is the Tim Pool, Jack Dorsey, and what's her name? Oh, I thought I queued it up. Tim Pool Twitter exists a liberal bias. So this is the Joe Rogan podcast where they were talking about it before they were admitting any of these things. And for some reason, Jack Dorsey brought his lawyer to the head of legal counsel to kind of speak for him so he doesn't get grilled too much. But Poole and Rogan were supposedly pushing back on Dorsey, which is a funny situation because we're all basically saying, we know what you're doing. We know you're shadow banning. We know there's a bias. We know that you're censoring a lot of individuals, political people, and stories while pushing a narrative. And she's just trying to gaslight everybody and say, no, obviously Dorsey knows that this is going on, but at the same time, they're being forced to do it by the machine. So they're like, yeah, you have to do these things, and yeah, you're going to go to Congress and get an ear beating. You're going to take your talking to like the rest of us. But this is political theater. Like, they're not actually going to do anything about it. It's because the public is aware that these things are going on, and there's many demonstrable instances of this collusion going on, but they can't admit it either. And so they're continuing on with the ruse. They're just going to continue to say, like, oh yeah, nothing's going on here. People say, oh, we can see right through it. We know exactly what you're doing. Here's an instance of them confronting them about it. They gaslight you because they can't say anything. And then they'll get, in a few more clips, we'll show you that they get dragged into Congress and the Senate, and they get a tongue lashing for that. And then nothing happens. So it's like a big game of good cop, bad cop, where the Democrats and the liberals start bashing them. It's like, you're not censoring enough, and you're letting out all this misinformation or hate speech or something. And then on the other side, the Republicans are giving them tongue lashing. You're censoring too much. How dare you attack conservatives? But then at the end of the day, they do nothing. And they're like, oh, well, we don't have enough power, so we can't do anything. And then this year, they're like, well, now that we have a marginal, stranglehold on the Congress, maybe we're gonna come after people. But I bet you it'd be more good cop, bad cop, where nothing really happens, unless you go after the Republicans and the Democrats that are part of the machine. So, like, I'm thinking of the Mitt Romneys of the world, where they're rhinos, Republican in name only, or neocons, which I don't even understand the full definition of that, other than that maybe that they have the same lobbyists as the Democrats from the 80s and 90s, and they're hang-ons that help execute these things from the Republican side of the aisle. But anyways, here's the interview.
I believe that to be the case.
So your platform restricts speech.
Our platform promotes speech unless people violate our rules.
And in a specific direction.
In any direction.
But I don't want to say his name. The guy who calls for death gets a suspension. The guy who insinuates death gets a permanent ban.
But Tim, you're misinterpreting what I'm saying, and I feel like you're doing it deliberately. It's not about one particular thing. It's about a pattern and practice of violating our rules.
And you have a pattern and practice of banning only one faction of people.
I don't agree with that.
Recently published an article where they looked at 22 high-profile bannings from 2015 and found 21 of them were only on one side of the cultural debate.
But I don't look at the political spectrum of people when I'm looking at their tweets.
Right, you have a bias.
I don't know who they are.
You're biased, and you're targeting specific individuals because your rules support this perspective.
No, I don't agree with that.
Well,
so can you be clear though in like what rules support that perspective?
Specifically, the easiest one is misgendering, right? Because that's so clearly ideological. If you ask a conservative, what is misgendering? They'll say if someone is biologically male, and you call them, she. Biologically male, and you call them a she, that's misgendering. That's a conservative view.
I don't really want to go over the LGBT thing. Let's see if there's something more interesting to dig in here.
Statements. The point is,
but I just wonder if they have that context. And that's where we have also failed, as well as just explaining the why behind a lot of our policy and reasons.
I would agree, and I think it's fine. You did research and you found this to be true, but we can't simply say maybe Ben Shapiro and the other conservatives who feel this way don't know. We can't, the point I'm trying to make is it's simply whether you believe it, whether you justify it or not is not the point. The point is you do have this rule. That rule is at odds with conservatives, period.
Well, I think that you're generalizing, but I think it is really important, as Jack said, to the why behind these things. The why is to protect people from abuse and harassment on our platform.
Which is not true, which we found out. And, I strongly recommend revisiting this if you haven't checked it out in a while, but you can see the dog and pony show that's going on here. And the other thing that's interesting about this is Rogan knows about it. Like, Rogan over the years has pulled back from being a Bigfoot person or a UFO person or a moon denier. Was he a flat earther? I don't know if he was, but he was into all this sort of stuff. And then over the years, he's pulled back, and he really claims to be liberal and lefty and progressive, and I'm sure he is in a lot of ways. But I also think he's playing dumb on a lot of these things. And he wants to be nice to Jack. He wants to be nice to this lady. I think he understands that they're in a very bad position. But at the same time, he's getting affected by it to a degree. He brought on Tim Pool to argue for him so that he doesn't have to be the one saying all this. And so it's interesting because you got Dorsey bringing his lawyer, who's more than happy to gaslight everybody, even though we know for a fact that, according to the Twitter files, that she was chief counsel talking to the FBI along with the FBI lawyer and who knows how many other people, a bunch of people. And so this is a big wag the dog moment, right? Like, they're putting on this courtroom drama. They bring on these pawns, the lawyer and Poole, to hash it out, and then the two of them act like that they're playing dumb, like, oh, I didn't know that Twitter's doing all that, or this must be some giant misconception, or like, I don't know what all's going on. But at the same time, he knows he's not allowed to say anything about it. And Rogan's playing along and playing dumb, and he's like, well, maybe I don't know these issues that well, so I'm going to let Poole tell it for me. And, I'm sure he has reasons for this, and he has a stake in all this as well. So I can understand why. It's the same reason why most of the engineers who are aware of this in Silicon Valley don't say anything, is because there's a lot of money on the table, as we just outlined in the Levels FYI thing. Or they have families, or, or a more sympathetic way to describe this is there's this giant war on terrorism, which happens to a lot to do with these, it's like the Cold War never really ended, right? It's the colder Cold War. So what we're really talking about is the colder Cold War, like cyber war. And they keep talking about, there's going to be cyber attacks and stuff in addition to the pandemics and whatever, and the threat of nuclear war. But it's like when the Cold War ended with Russia, it didn't really end. It just took a new form. And then as we rolled into the 2000s and post 9/11, whether that was provoked or not, or it was an inside job or not, doesn't really matter. The point is that these are events that happened that facilitated the Patriot Act, which is facilitating, mass surveillance and all these issues that we're talking about. And the other thing is there's a lot of 20-somethings that weren't even alive then, or maybe they were babies. And now they're rolling into this as if it's all new, or this isn't an ongoing saga, which it is, and not even aware of this thing called the Cold War. They might have heard that there is this thing called the Cold War, the same way they heard about Vietnam or World War I or II, but they don't understand that this is still going on. Like, because of nuclear weapons, you have hypervigilance. So, to be charitable to the Twitter side of the table here, the argument is that these things are going on, so we have to put up this dog and pony show and blah 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 blah. On the other side, you have all these people that are like, why is everything a double standard? Why is that? And you're like, well, these are the reasons why. Is that right or wrong? It's probably wrong. Is it shredding the Constitution? Yes. Is that the goal of the Constitution? Probably. I don't know. All I can really say about this, and I've been saying this forever, is that it's happening. here's some of the reasons why. We can debate it if it's good or not. I mean, there's even like I've done this in other interviews where it shows George Bush and he's talking about like the famous Benjamin Franklin quote, like those who sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither. And he's going like, well, there's a fine line between liberty and security, and it's hard to have your cake and eat it too. And so you might end up, for the sake of security, giving up all your liberties. But at the same time, to preserve your liberties, you still need a strong offense. And you can go back and forth on this. And I personally think that they jumped the shark and crossed that line, and were in the Rubicon a long time ago. But here we are, right? And that's about as reasonable about it as I can be. So let's move on. So the next one here, there's a reason why I wanted to illustrate that Jack Dorsey was very reasonable earlier on, like in the 2010s or something. And I think he really thought he was doing a lot of good, and I think he did. Twitter did a lot of great things. Here's Karen Swisher at Recode, another tech conferencey thing. Now, she's hyper-liberal and all that sort of thing. But I think at this time, everybody was much more reasonable. I think Dorsey was probably more of a libertarian before he got pushed into all this. And let's give it a listen to build some character around who Jack Dorsey is.
No, I can hear you. All right, so Twitter. Explain in detail and in triplicate, if you can, the buying process of Twitter that's going on right now.
I cannot.
All right. Secondly, do you feel responsible for Donald Trump being president?
Oh, sorry. This is definitely about when things are getting spicy. So this probably is, 2016-ish? 17? I don't know. But I think since this point on, he definitely took a turn, and they were resisting it. But let's get a sense of who Jack Dorsey is.
I'm just trying to do the easy ones.
America is responsible for Donald Trump being president.
But do you feel Twitter had some? What do you feel? What do you feel like? Here this guy is used. He's like a Twitter savant. So tell me what you think. And it's all over Saturday Night Live, and it's an interesting thing. But he really knows how to use the tools that you've provided him from your brain.
He does. He's known how to use it for quite some time. I think it's an important time for the company and the service, and having the president-elect on our service, using it as a direct line of communication, allows everyone to see what's on his mind in the moment, and I think that's interesting. I think it's fascinating. I haven't seen that before. So we're definitely entering a new world where everything is on the surface, and we can all see it in real time, and we can have conversations about it. So where does that go? I'm not really sure, but it's definitely been fascinating to learn from.
How do you feel?
Complicated.
Okay.
I feel very proud of the role of the service and what it stands for, and everything that we've done, and that continues to accelerate every single day, especially as it's had such a spotlight on it through his usage and through the election. So as we can see here, Dorsey was not he wasn't a zealous person that wanted to censor Donald Trump, right? And that's like the F word or the T word in liberal media and stuff. And what we've seen since then, it blew out of control with the Russia stuff and in the multiple impeachments and whatever. So here he seems conflicted. He seems like he's aware of the issues. He might even know that they're doing something about it. But at the same time, he's willing to allow it to happen, and he seemed comfortable with it. I don't think he's been pushed to do anything about it yet. They didn't come until, I think, going up to the 2020 election. So I'm just showing this to illustrate that I don't think that they're the evil villains that a lot of people are going to make them out to be or have been doing. I think that they're what's the expression go? It's the times make the man, and sometimes the man makes the times, or challenging times causes men to rise, and great men something, I don't know. But yeah, so here I see someone a little beyond the turning point where he decides to go all in, or not even all in. I just play along, play ball, however you want to state it. So I have some other clips here. There was another, I read Things a Little Bird Told Me by Bizstone. That was one of his co-founders. And he was describing in his book, which is about the founding of Twitter, how it started out from IDEO and then turned into Twitter through a hackathon or something. And that had a lot to do with Ev Williams and Blogger being sold to Google and him having some money to do a startup called IDEO and blah, blah, blah. And anyways, Bizstone was like a PM type of person that was kind of writing with Ev Williams and Jack Dorsey, and I forget the other main characters, but there was a few. And he was basically talking about like how Twitter was working with the NSA and friends over things that were going on in Iran, Egypt, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Arab Springs or whatever. So I queued this up. We'll let this play for a second just to give you a flavor of what they were saying about how Twitter was working with the NSA. And the other thing to note about this was published in, I want to say 2014. And they were very open about it. Like, this was not a secret. So the fact that we're in 2023 talking about this as if it's new or even only a couple years in the making, it's not. It's decades long. And by the time this was published, he's talking about events that were transpiring in 2009 when Obama took the White House shortly after Bush. So let's listen.
In The New Yorker, Malcolm Gladwell wrote, "Some of this grandiosity is to be expected. Innovators tend to be solipsists. They often want to cram every stray fact and experience into their new model. This bugged me because we weren't the ones taking credit for the Moldova protests. On the contrary, we'd been going out of our way to make it clear that we didn't think Twitter was the voice of revolution. Twitter was just a tool that people were using to do great things. And wasn't that amazing enough? If you give them the right tools, people do great things. Nobody said that the telephone brought down the Berlin Wall, but were phone calls made? Hell yeah! Twitter was proof that leaderless self-organizing systems could be true agents of change." As the Arab Spring began at the end of 2010, it became even more important for me to clarify Twitter's role. Activists in Arab countries used Twitter and other services like Facebook to organize uprisings. It got so that we could practically predict the next revolution. We'd start to see mounting tweets in a certain area, and we could have made a phone call. "Hey, dictator, you might want to flee." Suddenly, as the Arab Spring progressed, every major news outlet wanted me to come on and talk about what was happening. My instinct was not to do that. Not just because I was afraid of being outed as an idiot when it came to global affairs, but I felt that it wasn't right to gloat or even focus on what all this meant for our business. People were dying. I wasn't going to go on TV and say, "Yeah, look at us, we're a great company." While we were glad to be a visible part of the changes taking place, I wanted to be very careful about what our role was. We didn't have a publicist or anything, so I was the de facto guy deciding if we'd talk to members of the press and about what. So I decided not to talk to any of them. Some of our board members and closest investors were kind of like, "What, are you crazy? This is huge international news exposure." They had a point. Whenever we went on TV, 1 million new people signed up to Twitter, but I still wanted to say no to all the major media outlets. I didn't want to piss them off. I hoped they would talk about Twitter at some point. I just couldn't endorse it under those circumstances. So I wrote to Raymond Nasser, my friend and communications advisor. I forwarded him the email I wanted to send in response to the media requests. It was short, and it basically said, "Thank you for your interest, but we're not talking about this." Raymond, who has always had a great economy of language, said, "It's perfect. I just add the word inappropriate." So I sent out an email saying, "Thanks so much for the opportunity, but we don't think it would be appropriate for us to do the interview or to offer comments beyond what we've already addressed to the public on our company's blog." Most of the responses I received read, "Understood." When I wanted to get the job at Blogger, I'd visualized myself working there. I believed that kind of visualization had the power to make things happen. Now, as the user cases I'd envisioned for Twitter all came true, it felt like a waking dream. Things had gotten very serious very quickly. Suddenly we had to make choices about how we interacted with governments. Occasionally we needed to take down the service for maintenance. Whenever we did that, we put up a note warning the users. But in June 2009, when we put up our customary maintenance notice, we immediately got about 100 calls and emails saying, "You can't take the service down, Ben. There's a scheduled demonstration in Iran." The Iranian government had shut down other means of communication, and Twitter was considered vital. Among all the emails we received during that incident, one message stood out. It came from one of our board members. A U.S. government employee had sent a note to him, and he forwarded it as an FYI. The State Department didn't want Twitter to go down for maintenance. Jason Goldman and I hashed out the decision. We needed to do this maintenance. We'd already postponed it 13 times, and if we didn't do it soon, the system would possibly break forever. Finally, I said, let's move the maintenance one more time. It wasn't because I wanted to follow the State Department's orders. I didn't pretend to understand the situation, but because Twitter was supposed to work, and our job was to keep it up and running. What was happening in Iran was directly tied to the growing global significance of Twitter and its importance as a communication and information network. So we rescheduled the planned maintenance for mid-afternoon, which was the middle of the night in Iran. To an outside observer, it may have looked as if the State Department had made a call on their red phone and we scrambled to make the change. The thinking was, if we postponed maintenance because the U.S. government had asked us to, then what else were we supposed to do for them? But the government did not have decision-making power at Twitter. We didn't want to help our government or any other government. We had to stay a neutral technology provider. On June 16, 2009, the day after the maintenance, I posted the following message to the Twitter blog. Twitter is back and our network capacity is now significantly increased. The planned maintenance that we moved from last night to this afternoon was a success, and it took half the time we expected. When we worked with our network provider yesterday to reschedule this planned maintenance, we did so because events in Iran were tied directly to the growing significance of Twitter as an important communication and information network. Although presumed impossible, if not extremely difficult, we decided together to move the date.
So anyways, as you can see in Bizstone's own book, in his own words, even though it was voiced by probably a voice actor reading for him, that there was a lot of discussion about this, and they were hesitant to do anything that would alter Twitter from being democratized citizen journalism or people being able to speak their mind and let everyone else know what's going on. And he was trying to balance it with what the State Department or the government wanted. And supposedly they were resisting at this time. So that was 2009. The book was written somewhere in 2014. This is pre-Trump, pre-Hunter, pre-Biden, all that jazz. But definitely the Obama years. That they were balancing. This is the sort of discussions they were having. These are the sort of events that were happening, at least at Twitter at that time. And I'm guessing because of these concerns, everyone kind of looked to not just Twitter, but Facebook and all social media, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and friends, and was basically saying like, hey, we got to get a handle on this because this is the Cold War, but it's really a war for hearts and minds. so on and so forth. And so definitely muddy waters. There's a lot to say about that. I highly recommend reading the book. This reminds me a lot of what Wesley Clark was saying about how the kind of geopolitics stuff, and it was basically going on. Like Clark, he ran for president. He was the NATO commander, head general. I don't know what the title is, but basically saying like, hey, the world stage, the world is looking at how the power went from Britain to the U.S. and then eventually from the U.S. to China. And there's a lot going on the world stage that I think if you're just talking about Twitter or Facebook or Elon Musk or something, you're not even grokking. And the media is not really telling you about it. They used to talk about this sort of stuff. But anyways, let's get a excerpt out of his book, Don't Wait for the Next War, by General Clark.
Other major efforts have targeted defense firms like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and BAE Systems, which reportedly lost reams of data on America's state-of-the-art F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. According to the Wall Street Journal, the fighter program was broken into repeatedly, possibly as early as 2007, with the spies encrypting the technology as it was stolen. Investigators reportedly traced the intrusions back to China, where, presumably, the data could accelerate Chinese aircraft design or reveal flaws or characteristics in the U.S. design that could be exploited. But there is also the real possibility that access to data storage inside such firms provides the opportunity to insert malicious and destructive code that could delay production or even compromise the performance of aircraft or other weapon systems under certain conditions. The threat of cyber theft raises the specter of enemy hackers circumventing years of careful control of communications, aerospace, nuclear, and other national security-sensitive technologies, and undercutting a host of U.S. and U.S.-sponsored non-proliferation efforts. These threats are, of course, a threat to business and to sensitive U.S. national security programs, but systematically, these efforts also pose a major threat to the U.S. economy itself. Our economic advantages in technology, research, and development, advantages for which the United States spends tens of billions of dollars each year, are being stolen. This is our national treasure, the sum of millions of hours of work and billions of dollars, directly paid for or indirectly supported by the U.S. taxpayer, flowing out of the country. The flow is sometimes invisible, usually cannot be traced, and often goes unreported. In our economy, we rely on markets, stock markets, commodity markets, futures markets, and cyber espionage provides vast opportunities for inside information to be used for private profit and ultimately for the destruction of the market systems fundamental to the U.S. economy. It is possible for criminal...
So as you can see, there's a big emphasis on cyber, and cyber being the new Cold War, the colder Cold War, and that the way technology is not only used or developed, but the technology being stolen or used against us is a huge international thing. And it's not just the technology to be used for jet fighters or tanks or whatever. It's also the intelligence, the signals that it produces that allows us to do intelligence gathering at scale. And so, again, the Cold War never ended. And that was the main reason why I wanted to bring that clip up. Here's Clark in his own words instead of his audiobook. Usually I like the audiobooks or the actual books. I like to read them, but for YouTube purposes, this information is buried in books, so nobody ever really gets to hear it. Even in my circles, most people don't have the time to actually read the books. They're too busy doing work while they listen to stuff. So by converting what's buried in the books into audio, or in this case YouTube, you unearth it and it can add to the conversation. I like to reinforce what I've read with the audiobook when I'm driving, especially commuting. I did 20 years in and out of the Valley, so I listened to a lot in addition to a lot of reading. But let's listen to Clark and see what he says.
So now what you have to do with China is you have to start by rebuilding their awe of America. They were in awe of America. 2005, when I was there, a young guy who spent a year at the Kennedy Center and was very close to the leadership of China, said to me, he says, we know that you and Britain were best friends and Britain gave you leadership of the world. He said, China wants to be your best friend, so you'll give us leadership of the world. And, you know, you say that to Americans, they all smile, say, oh, the Chinese are so naive, and besides, they could never, you know, but that's the way they felt. They knew that they could become leaders, and they wanted to do it in a friendly fashion. After 2008, when they look at us, they say, boy, it's a shame about America. We'll take from it what we can, you know, still got some great universities, we'll send some people over there, use their capital, take their technology, they've still got a great military, but their political system's broken. Their economy's not going anywhere, and you know, the future belongs to us. Now, the National Intelligence Council estimate says the Chinese believe that this decade is their decade of decision. So you can look at what China's doing now with the Air Defense Identification Zone, the assertion of the 9-dash line, the Senkaku Islands, and others, and say they're getting ready to make a move. But like all moves in foreign policy, you can see them foreshadowed. You can see it coming. There's never like a bolt from the blue. The Chinese have said for 25 or 30 years they want their land back. Okinawa belonged to China. Now, can you imagine when a Chinese newspaper, official newspaper, says Okinawa, you know, that's a Chinese property. They sort of dribble it out there and say, let's see who says anything about it. Well, no one said anything yet. So it'll come up again, and they're watching Ukraine because they're asking themselves, if Russia can get Crimea, couldn't we do something in Taiwan? Does it work in Taiwan? Let's say there's some little green men that show up in Taiwan and you know, and I mean, no, they can
with
do
masks.
That.
So that
Well, isn't that telling, right? Like, this is an old clip of Wesley Clark shortly after his presidential run, I believe, somewhere in 14 or 15. When did he run? 12? 8? I don't know. It was a long time ago. But anyways, he's talking about Ukraine. He's talking about how China wants to take over Taiwan and wants their land back. This is what we're talking about today in 2023 with Russia-Ukraine war currently in progress. And a lot of commentary has gone off about, like, well, you know, China's watching to see how much the Russians can get through, take either annex parts of the Ukraine or take the whole thing. Will NATO, will the U.S. through a proxy war in Ukraine, using the Ukrainians, take it back, or will we, you know, advance? These are a lot of what's going on today. But here's a 2014 clip of them discussing this way back when, right? And it's the same conversation, it's still going on. It's anyways. I'll let this go on.
With masks,
you can't really tell where they're
looking. They're saying, "What's the reaction of the West? Can we get away with it? Can we?" Nobody at this stage wants a major war. Not Putin, certainly not Xi Jinping. He's got to worry about the economy. He's got to keep his legitimacy. But can he have some of his cake right now and still have the cake there? Can he have some cake and eat it too? I mean, he likes the cake. But he'd like just a little advanced serving, please, of what he's going to get later. So they're looking to do this. This is going to happen unless we can, A, raise our economic strength, B, be smart enough with China to talk to them privately, show them respect, stop arguing about things that aren't significant strategically, and lay it on the line on things that are strategic. Look, they're talking about building their new intercontinental ballistic missile system and deploying submarine launch missiles, and they've made an announcement they can blow up half the United States.
Yeah, so without getting into all that and without segueing too much, we've been here for a little bit. Let's keep it going. So there's all these international concerns Cyber plays a big role into it. That's why the tech companies are such a big deal, in addition to the media companies. I think we saw a huge play into all that. So let's go on to the next one. Another person that was talking about it a lot, Al Gore. I don't know how you feel about him. I have a love-hate relationship with the guy. I really like him personally, and I love his speaking style. I think he's very effective. Although I don't agree a lot with what he's driving to, and I feel like there's alternative motives here. But I like the guy, and it's definitely worth listening to because even in his writing, it's very insightful. So let's give it a listen.
Technology and the World Brain.
And this is Al Gore's book, Al Gore in the Future. And by the way, Al Gore was on Apple's board and helped revive it. And in addition to claiming he was the inventor of the internet and the next president and being at this pivotal moment, Gore v. Bush and stolen elections and stuff, he was on Apple's board with Steve Jobs and stuff. So he actually had a pretty big hand in help shaping the Microsoft-Apple relationship during the Clinton years, during the Microsoft antitrust, but also help brokering a deal to help revive the deal, Apple with Microsoft money. That's another story for another time. But anyways, he's pretty pivotal in a lot of these things, and I'll probably talk more about this at a later date. But let's listen in on what Al Gore has to say about the future.
Writers have used the human nervous system to describe electronic communication since the invention of the telegraph. In 1851, only 6 years after Samuel Morse received the message, "What hath God wrought?" Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote, quote, "By means of electricity, the world of matter has become a great nerve, vibrating thousands of miles in a breathless point of time. The round globe is a vast brain, instinct with intelligence." End quote. Less than a century later, H.G. Wells modified Hawthorne's metaphor when he offered a proposal to develop a world brain, which he described as a commonwealth of all the world's information, accessible to all the world's people, as, quote, "a sort of mental clearinghouse for the mind, a depot where knowledge and ideas are received, sorted, summarized, digested, clarified, and compared." End quote. In the way Wells used the phrase world brain, what began as a metaphor is now a reality. You can look it up right now on Wikipedia, or search the World Wide Web on Google for some of the estimated 1 trillion web pages. Since the nervous system connects to the human brain, and the brain gives rise to the mind, it was understandable that one of the 20th century's greatest theologians, Teilhard de Chardin, would modify Hawthorne's metaphor yet again. In the 1950s, he envisioned the planetization of consciousness within a technologically enabled network of human thoughts that he termed the, quote, "global mind," end quote. And while the current reality may not yet match Teilhard's expansive meaning when he used that provocative image, some technologists believe that what is emerging may nevertheless mark the beginning of an entirely new era. To paraphrase Descartes, it thinks, therefore it is. There is considerable debate and controversy over when and even whether artificial intelligence will reach a stage of development at which its ability to truly think is comparable to that of the human brain. The analysis presented in this chapter is based on the assumption that such a development is still speculative and will probably not arrive for several decades at the earliest. The disagreement over whether it will arrive at all requires a level of understanding about the nature of consciousness that scientists have not yet reached. Supercomputers have already demonstrated some capabilities that are far superior to those of human beings, and are effectively making some important decisions for us already. Handling high-frequency algorithmic trading on financial exchanges, for example, and discerning previously hidden complex relationships within very large amounts of data. The supercomputers and software in use have...
So, yeah. Al Gore was saying stuff. I mean, he had some really good stuff on this subject. We'll get into Al Gore at another time. But he's been heavily thinking about this. I know Democrats in general, Republicans, the government thinks about it in terms of the hive mind. So it makes sense that if it's a war for hearts and minds, that the internet and therefore social media and the tech companies have a big role to play in that. And so it makes sense to me that they would, try to infiltrate and control the narrative or use these devices to achieve some other thing. But all this brings up the whole Al Gore thing all over again. It talks about the 2000 Gore v. Bush, how the elections might have been rigged and stuff. And here's Scalia talking about Gore v. Bush.
What has been, in your view, the most contentious? What's the one that most people ask you about?
Contentious? Well, I guess the one that created most waves of disagreement was Bush versus Gore. Okay, that comes up all the time, and my usual response is get over it.
Get over the possible corrupting of the American presidential system. Justice Scalia?
Look at my court didn't bring the case into the court. It was brought into the courts by Al Gore. He is the one who wanted courts to decide the question. When Richard Nixon thought that he had lost the election because of chicanery in Chicago, he chose not to bring it into the courts. But Al Gore wanted the courts to decide it. So the only question in Bush versus Gore was whether the presidency would be decided by the Florida Supreme Court or by the United States Supreme Court. That was the only question, and that's not a hard one.
No regrets?
Oh, no regrets at all, especially since it's clear that the thing would have ended up the same way anyway. The press did extensive research into what would have happened if what Al Gore wanted done had been done county by county, and he would have lost anyway.
So the irony of Al Gore v. Bush was the notion of election fraud and all that sort of stuff. And, going into the Hillary v. Trump or Trump v. Biden, none of those issues went away. In fact, we could talk about that at another time and election fraud or whatever. But the Democrats gave hell. And they were claiming, it's rigged. And that wasn't considered disinformation at the time. And now it's considered disinformation if you question anything when one side loses over the other, or if you have any questions or you talk about it on YouTube one way or the other. I'm not going to do that here. But we'll get into it at other times. I have other videos if you care to look at them that kind of get into it. So let's go on to the next clip. I guess we'll get into it for a minute since I did have it.
Very intense battle, and he conceded. He did the right thing for this nation.
Mr. Vice President, what was going through your mind when you conceded?
Well, first of all, I want to express my gratitude and admiration for Liz Cheney on the issue that she's become known for recently, and that is standing up to the craziness in her party. What was going through my mind is what's going to be best for the country. There was no way to really see playing it out in a way that would overturn the result. It would have gone to the House of Representatives, and the constitutional procedures gave the other side the complete advantage. In some ways, I'll quote Winston Churchill, who said about Americans, Americans generally do the right thing after first exhausting every available alternative. That's sort of the situation I was in. But more seriously, it was a question of what is right for the country. Pamela, the refusal of the former president to acknowledge that he lost by 7 million votes. It wasn't close, for God's sake. And apparently a majority of his party is still so enthralled to him that they still...
The irony, the guy that like sued the Supreme Court and etc. to contest his election is now complaining that Trump didn't concede without suing and all this. The irony, right? Like, I only bring this up to bring up the irony, and you know, that's politics for you. And I on this channel, I personally want to get past the politics. I just more want to talk about the story. In this particular episode, I want to talk about how the tech got and the media is put into the middle of this, whether they like it or not. I mean, they might have been young, bright-eyed kids like myself that jumped into this thinking this was all fun, and then when they realize that people are playing for keeps, and we're talking about a global empire or world dominance or whatever, right? This is where we find ourselves. But yeah, that requires a lot of reading, research, and analysis in order to understand where we're at with things, or to even improve them, especially from an engineering perspective. It's like, how do you improve this? Oh, seems complicated. So this one is the Patriot Act. I think we need to talk about that. I think we needed to talk about that for a second. I mentioned it briefly, but I wanted to show some clips on it. Normally when I'm making documentaries, I would condense all this stuff down. So this seems to be running longer than I thought it would to get through it, but that's okay.
Any notion of superpower invulnerability in Americans' minds fell away on September the 11th, 2001. Those in the business of protecting the nation internally or abroad wanted a radical reset. The authorities felt new methods were in order, tools that would have a certain effect on civil liberties. President George W. Bush delivered a speech aimed at reassuring Americans.
Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America.
Bush and Congress touched the foundation with the USA Patriot Act. The letters stand for uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. The limited duration law was extended, the second time by President Obama. It allowed the FBI, CIA, and NSA to coordinate for added strength. This removed restrictions against listening in on other people's private phone conversations, reading their mail, medical records, bank records, and allowed searches without a person's knowledge. That was declared anti-constitutional. Viet Dinh helped write the law.
We had a system of wiretapped authorizations that were first enacted in 1968. The USA Patriot Act ensured that law enforcement's authorization kept up to speed with the technologies.
Ex-FBI Michael German's now in the Civil Liberties Union.
They didn't get any more leeway to investigate guilty people. What they got leeway to do is investigate people they didn't even suspect. And that's really the problem, because that opens the door to collecting on anyone.
To hold indefinite.
Yeah, so that's, I think that term's called dragnet, where you just collect everything regardless, which is super unconstitutional, but they did it anyways because of 9/11. And that led to a 20-year war in Afghanistan, toppling Iraq, etc. Here's Tulsi talking about it. We got some other clips that I think are pretty good. I'm going to try to start moving a little bit faster through this, so pardon me.
Unfortunately, Congress just passed a bill that will allow the continuation of our intelligence and law enforcement agencies to infringe on the civil liberties of the American people. Now, the Patriot Act and the FISA Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, needed to undergo very real reforms if these constitutional abuses are to be prevented in the future. Unfortunately, Congress failed to do this, which is why I voted against the bill. The American people should never be forced to choose between security and liberty. Now, the passage of the Patriot Act in the wake of the terrorist attacks on 9/11 and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, it has been allowing for the abuses of our civil liberties and overreach by our own intelligence and law enforcement agencies through doing things like warrantless sweeping collection of our data, violating our Fourth Amendment constitutional rights. Now, unfortunately, a rare bipartisan opportunity to truly reform the Patriot Act and FISA has been squandered. While there were marginal improvements in the bill that passed, they don't even come close to the real reforms necessary to ensure both our national security and our constitutional rights are protected. Now here...
Thanks, Tulsi. Appreciate that. It would have been nice when you're in Congress to do something about it, but all right. I think this is Bush.
This is a two-front war. It's a two-front war. And it's a war we're going to win on both fronts. But make no mistake, the best way to make sure we protect our homeland is to succeed by bringing the terrorists abroad who try to strike us to justice.
Barbara, what's in this new anti-terrorism bill that would presumably help investigators get to the bottom of all this?
Right. There's a lot in this bill. Attorney General.
Yeah, so we'll go on to the next one. I really started taking note when I was at Yahoo and Marissa Myers and TechCrunch, Michael Arrington, were talking about the NSA's involvement and how Yahoo sued or fought FISA and the government, and then ultimately lost and were forced to comply. And if not doing so, she personally would have been held for treason or something, according to her. So let's have a listen on what Marissa Meyer and Michael Arrington have to say.
What are you doing to protect us from tyrannical government?
Sorry, I've been watching your other interviews, so I knew this was going to come up. I think that
and again, I think this was like back in 2013, 2014.
A board member and a good friend, and I agree with a lot of what he said, so I'm not going to repeat that. But what I will say is I'm really proud, and I can't take credit for it because it happened before I got to Yahoo, but I'm proud to be part of an organization that from the very beginning in 2007 with the NSA and FISA and PRISM has been skeptical of and has been scrutinizing those requests. In 2007, Yahoo filed a lawsuit against the Patriot Act parts of PRISM and FISA. We fought that. We were the key plaintiff. A lot of people have wondered about that case and who it was. It was us.
You lost.
We lost.
And then you caved. Not you. You weren't there yet.
Right. But the thing is, like when you lose, so we fought, we lost.
Yeah.
If you don't comply, it's treason.
Yeah. Treason.
So, and which
Well, and now you're going through the process of suing the government.
So now what we do is on each request we review it. We scrutinize it. We push back on a lot. We push back on a lot of requests from local government. We push back on requests in terms of the NSA. We can't talk about those things because they're classified.
Why?
And so I mean,
let's just say, like right now, you were just to tell us the truth about what's going on, the stuff that's classified. Like, what do you think would happen to you?
I mean, releasing classified information is treason.
And then what happens?
Generally, and lands you, incarcerated.
So you're
or
not.
Could, and so.
So you're not.
So, I mean, we are. I mean, I think that when you look at, we actually think that it makes more sense in terms of scrutinizing requests, analyzing them, doing our best to protect our users.
Yeah.
That it makes sense for us to work within the system. We filed suit against the government again on Monday, asking to be able to be more transparent with the numbers on the NSA requests. So, we have really, taken the charge, as have a lot of other companies as well, of pushing for more transparency, of pushing back on unreasonable requests, of pushing back on what we viewed as legislation that might not be reasonable. And we are constantly in a position of petitioning the government to be able to release, for example, the documents of that 2007 case. So, we're going to keep doing.
So Marissa Myers, my old boss, or sort of, she was in the organization I was at Google, but I really liked her. It's too bad that the Yahoo thing didn't work out so hot. Anyways, next one. I believe this one's Larry Ellison from Oracle, another Steve Jobs buddy. I guess they had a lot in common during when Jobs went to Pixar, bought Pixar from George Lucas and did the Toy Story thing. And they would talk a lot about how to take over Apple again, which they did. But Oracle had a lot of roots in the NSA and friends. And so let's hear what he has to say about this whole Patriot Act, FISA thing, and NSA thing.
Is America's third richest man. His company, Oracle, makes a widely used database. It handles everything from online banking to airline reservations. It is even used by NSA. But Oracle is in a legal battle with Google, accusing the online search giant of using its programming language without permission. I sat down with Ella.
Yeah, I forgot about that. The Oracle bought Java, and Google uses Java for a lot of their programming languages, which forced them to go create their own language called Go in order to escape, this economic rent seeking through patents and stuff, because Oracle bought Sun, which owned Java, blah, 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 blah. But let's get to the NSA stuff.
Larry specifically. I think...
Larry per se?
Yeah, Larry per se.
Why?
Because he makes the decisions over there. He runs that company. No one else runs that company. And they decided, let me be very clear, when you write a program for the Android phone, you write it, you use the Oracle tool, or Oracle Java tools for everything. And at the very end, you press a button and said, convert this to Android format. We don't compete with Google. We don't do anything Google does.
Sorry, that's still on the Android, Java, Google fight. But the part that I was interested in, so here I think he's talking about Steve Jobs. The part I was interested in is how Oracle, Google, Apple, and friends work with the NSA. This one I think is 2014, so around the same circa era as Marissa Mayer and Yahoo on TechCrunch. But let's get to it. I might have to skip around a little bit until I find it.
Yeah, my best friend for 25 years.
What is it about him? We recognize the fact that he loved Apple, he wanted to make Apple great, and he did. But what was it about him that enabled him?
Because he's gone.
Did you watch him die?
Getting shorter. The cancer even wore him out. I think on a Saturday or a Sunday began. Let me tell you who was collecting. He was doing. We always.
Okay, I think this is the piece.
The great thing is we live in a democracy. I don't believe that. I just don't.
Well said. Where do you come down on what NSA is doing?
Well, the great thing is we live in a democracy. If we don't like what NSA is doing, we can just get rid of the government and put in a different government. I think actually we've been collecting this information for so long, and long before NSA was collecting it. Let me tell you who was collecting it. American Express. Bank of Visa, all of your credit card data, we have, and all of your financial records. This whole issue of privacy is utterly fascinating to me. Who's ever heard of this information being misused by the government? In what way?
Well, I just hear you clearly. You're saying whatever the NSA is doing is okay with me.
It's great. It's great. It's essential. By the way, President Obama thinks it's essential. It's essential if we want to minimize the kind of strikes that we just had in Boston. It's absolutely essential.
But what point would it be alarming for you in terms of government surveillance? At what point would your red line be crossed?
If the government used it to do political targeting, if the Democrats used it to go after Republicans, if the Republicans used it to go after Democrats. In other words, if it became we stopped looking for terrorists and we started looking for people on the other side of the aisle.
It's so interesting, Charlie, to hear from Larry Ellison because he does so few interviews. It's rare to hear from him, especially on this NSA issue. So does he think we deserve privacy?
He doesn't, well, I think he probably does think there's some point, but I could not get him to tell me where the red line was. You know, it's a battle that everybody talks about, the debate. In fact, Hillary Clinton said in her speech that one of the things she's going to make a speech about is the balance between security and freedom and privacy.
Mm-hmm. And he seemed to be trying to make the case that, look, long since American Express, Visa, people have been collecting personal
They
data.
got a lot
on
of
their
stuff there.
customers.
He said, if you want to know who really knows who you are, go to those file companies when you apply for a credit card. They have more information than you can ever imagine.
That's great. All right. I know we're going to hear more from them, right?
Yeah, so as you can see, they were speaking very openly about this. They were saying Obama was in on it, Bush was in on it. All the heads of the tech companies were fully aware of this. This isn't a scandal that, I mean, it was out in the open. Like, we've been talking about this forever. So back to what we were saying earlier about Musk and Dorsey and Zuckerberg and friends, I feel like that they got pushed into this, and while they were talking about it, a lot of people were not paying attention to it either. And for whatever reason, it got downplayed on the news, and so here we are. But like, just to drive the point home a little bit more, here's Zuckerberg and Obama talking about it when I think Obama was still a candidate. Or maybe, yeah, I think it was the run-up to the 2008 election. So let's take a look.
Well, thank you so much, Facebook, for hosting this, first of all. My name is Barack Obama, and I'm the guy who got Mark to wear a jacket and tie. Thank you. And I think it's important for us to invest in our basic research. We can do all those things, but we're only going to be able to do it by taking a balanced approach, and that's what this big debate is about all about right now. All right?
All right, so, sorry, don't mean to cut off the applause.
No.
That was,
No.
It's a very thorough answer.
No. They were then people will have more confidence, they'll spend more, more people will get hired, and over.
Cesar Fernandez and Elisa Rectanas are participating in one of those roundtables, and they want to ask you this. Mr. President, in your deficit reduction speech last week, you spoke of the need
for making sure that high-skilled immigrants who come here, study, we've paid for their college degrees, we've given them scholarships, we've given them this training.
Yeah, so anyways, you can see a much younger Obama, you can see a much younger Zuckerberg. They were definitely friends. Tech and politics had already merged by 2008. It seems like they were already on the Democrat train with the Obama, and the things that came afterwards, we could talk about that and another thing. And not to pinpoint this on Obama specifically, but the point is that tech and the Democrats, I think it was a warm, friendly relationship, and then from the Obama years on out, it quickly heated up into what we have today. So that was the purpose of showing that clip. And then, you know, to illustrate how this quickly turned from like a warm, fuzzy, we're going to change the world, sing kumbaya kind of relationship, into the war on terrorism, i.e. the colder Cold War. I'm going to jump to a clip in the Social Network. No, sorry, Finding Snowden, I think was the name. It's just Snowden. I think it was the Lil Wayne that did a song that said Finding Snowden, whatever. But anyways, Snowden was the guy that outlined how the NSA was using Facebook for the hunt for terrorism. So here we go.
It's the cleanest Pakistani I've ever seen. We got no first-degree ties to government or ISI, no shady family. I mean, second-degree contacts are off the charts, but that's everyone in the Middle East with a six-figure income.
Well, it's not dirt that we need necessarily. It's a pressure point, something intimate, some kind of weakness. Can we look through his family?
Mm-hmm. How about his sister-in-law?
Yeah. What is that?
It's Karen mic activation. I wish we could take credit, but the Brits wrote it. Activation? Yeah, her laptop's off. Or it was, she just forgot to close it. Of course, how would she know? This shit is so sly, the webcam light doesn't even turn on. I always wonder what was under those. Okay, look. 15-year-old daughter. Okay, Snow White. 15-year-old daughter at the international school.
Yeah. Facebook? Is that possible?
Dude, Facebook's my bitch.
Seriously? Like she fights with her parents or...
Don't worry. I know all the hooks for this kind of phishing. Query name? So email, keyword, whatever selector you want. And justification is where I write. In other words, turning your daddy into a CIA informant.
Wait, that's it?
That's it, bro.
You don't have to get a FISA court order?
No, not here. X-key score's under 702 authority, which means no warrants.
Okay, but U.S. targets, then you'd have to get the court order.
You mean FISA? Yeah, there's a big-ass rubber stamp, dude. I mean, FISA judges are all appointed by the Chief Justice, who's like, you know...
So yeah. If you haven't seen the movie, I recommend showing it or seeing it, taking a look. There's tons of movies about it. Again, it's a big open secret. This is not new. Everybody was well aware of these sort of things. I think for the most part, we're just not allowed to talk about it, and then that prevents the general public from being aware of everything that's being talked about, at least offline. So, I mean, here's Snowden, if you're not familiar with Snowden, but by now I'm sure we're all familiar with Snowden.
I worked for Booz Allen Hamilton as an infrastructure analyst for NSA in Hawaii.
What are some of the positions that you held previously within the intelligence community?
I've been a systems engineer, systems administrator, side of the democratic model. When you are subverting the power of government, that's a fundamentally dangerous thing to democracy. And if you do that in secret consistently, you know, as the government does when it wants to benefit from a secret action that it took, it'll kind of give its officials a mandate to go, hey, you know, tell the press about this thing and that thing, so the public is on our side. But they rarely, if ever, do that when an abuse occurs. Everyone always go, oh, no comment, right? Two, is this going to cause harm? Is anybody going to get hurt? Is this program effective? Is there something we don't understand, right? Is there something Snowden doesn't understand? Does this guy just not get it, right? Are these documents fake? Whatever you want. Say we shouldn't run this story. And in every case, I'm aware of that process was followed. And that's why, right? Because there's a lot of people out there who don't like me, who criticize me, who go, this was unsafe, this caused harm to people or whatever. We're in 2019 now. I came forward, and these stories won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service Journalism, starting way back in June of 2013. We've had 6 years to show bodies. We've had 6 years to show harm. And you know, as well as I do, the government's happy to leak things when it's in their interest. Nobody has been hurt as a result of these disclosures because everyone who was involved in them was so careful. We wanted to maximize the public benefit while mitigating the potential risks. And I think we did a pretty good job of it. But just to get back to the main thing, the original thing that got us off on that trail, when I came forward in June of 2013, I gave one interview to the people who were in the room with the documents, Laura Poitras, Glenn Greenwald, Ewan McCaskill. And I said who I was. I said why I was doing this. I said what this was about, why it matters. And that we were constructing a system of turnkey tyranny. And even if you trust that to Obama, you never know whose hand is going to be on that key next. And all they have to do is turn it. And there's nothing we can do to stop it. The only thing that's restraining these programs really is policy, more so than law. And the president at any time can sign a napkin and those policies change. Well, after that, I went 6 months without giving any interviews.
So anyways, if you're not familiar with Snowden, there's tons of videos. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with him now. They made a movie about him, so I think we get it. YouTube is blocking my stream for some reason. So I'm going to keep recording for a little bit longer, and then I'm going to upload to Rumble and a couple other places, probably Odyssey, but they have size limits. Maybe BitChute, maybe Minds, maybe Gab. We'll see what happens. I'll probably have to chop it up a couple times for duration issues. But I'm going to finish up here with a couple more clips. Here is Edward Snowden on, I think, CBS News. Let's do that one real quick.
Show the audience a couple of examples of what you revealed. If you can have a slide up. And Ed, I don't know whether you can see, the slides are here. This is a slide of the PRISM program. And maybe you could tell the audience what that was that was revealed.
The best way to understand PRISM, because there's been a little bit of controversy, is to first talk about what PRISM is. Much of the debate in the US has been about metadata. They've said it's just metadata, and they're talking about a specific legal authority called Section 215 of the Patriot Act. That allows sort of warrantless wiretapping, mass surveillance of the entire country's sort of phone records, things like that. Who you're talking to, when you're talking to them, where you travel, these are all metadata events. PRISM is about content. It's a program through which the government could compel corporate America. It could sort of deputize corporate America to do its dirty work for the NSA. And even though some of these companies did resist, even though some of them, I believe Yahoo was one of them, challenged them in court, they all lost because it was never tried by an open court. They were only tried by a secret court. And so
And there it is, right? So exactly what I'm saying, Snowden's saying, is that this was tried in the FISA court, which is a secret court, while this was known publicly, or at least, amongst the companies and a lot of developers, but even a lot of them were oblivious. They know, but they don't know, or they don't want to know, something to that effect. This is an open secret, and this has been going on for a long time, and now people are acting surprised about the Facebook files and the Twitter files. So let's move on to the last 2 or 3 clips. This one we have General Hayden, who was leading up the NSA effort on this, well, for some time. And, it was just mass surveillance, Skynet sort of stuff. But let's see what he has to say.
Well, I want to thank you, Phil, for not only that introduction, but for coming up with the idea to make this our classroom here at Stanford. I want to thank all of you for coming. General Hayden, welcome to Stanford.
Thanks,
I want to start, if we can, by setting some facts on the ground. There's been a lot of confusion about the different programs, surveillance programs, that Ed Snowden has revealed in the past year. In particular, the distinction between the telephone metadata program, which policy wonks know under Section 215, and the Internet communications program under Section 702. Can you lay out for us in layman's terms what these programs do and how they do it?
Yeah. As Amy suggests, 215 program has to do with telephone metadata. So it's not email traffic, it's voice, and it's not content, it's fact of. And so what the agency gathers is who called whom, when, for how long. It's also within the technical definition of metadata to include locational data, but this program doesn't. Okay, it's consciously excluded. So what you've got is a record of all phone calls made within the United States or between the United States and overseas. It's given to the National Security Agency on a daily basis by the telecom providers. It's not technically electronic surveillance. It's not even metaphorically alligator clips on some wire somewhere getting signals. These are actually business records kept by the phone company in order to charge you for your phone usage. That pipe, that data, is then bent towards the National Security Agency where it's stored. A key point about this is that it is unarguably domestic. It's your stuff, it's my stuff, and it's put into this large database. Now, that in itself causes a lot of people concern because, even with good intent, there's some nervousness about the government having that kind of information. The NSA view is that, although that is kind of theoretically frightening, as a practical matter, one has to look at what happens to that data in order to make a coherent judgment about it. In essence, what you've got here are the records of phone calls, as I described, between and among us and between us and overseas, either originating overseas or originating here. That data is locked and inaccessible at NSA, except under a very narrow set of circumstances. Number one, the number of people who are...
That is not true at all. A lot of things have leaked since then that shows that this stuff is accessed by a lot of people, including Snowden, who created massive flash dump drives and exposed a lot of this. And I think in a lot of ways that they're really happy about that, because now they could just say it openly, and him being the head of the NSA, General Hayden, gets to now go on CNN and Fox and MSNBC or whoever and become a contributor and talk about it openly. And so it kind of feeds into his ego. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I'm just saying that, he's an admiral, so he's very aggressive and all that, and you have to be impressed with what they were able to accomplish. But at the same time, I don't think it's for the good of everyone. I think that they had alternative motives, agendas to control things, and that's what they're doing. But the notion that it's locked away and it's safe and nobody has... No, they're using it. They're using this data for all kinds of crazy things that we're not allowed to talk about. And, they're going to parse this data, create profiles for every individual person. All this tech turns into spyware, which they're consuming, and then whoever they deem to be a terrorist, they're going to go after, or political dissidents, or stuff. You could just let your imagination run wild with what they're doing. They're probably doing it. I don't need to say all that, so I'm not going to harp on it anymore. But it's impressive what happened. And it's an open secret, and we all know about it. And a lot of these companies were forced into it, even though they resisted. A lot of people just warmed up to it immediately, and were down with it were down for the cause to begin with. I just happen to think that Dorsey appeared to resist it for a really long time, all the way up to the 15s or 16s. Yahoo resisted, but was forced into it by the time Marissa Mayer showed up around 2010, 2009-ish. I don't know what the Google story is. I'm not clear on the Apple story. I think they resisted long for a while, like 12. But there's a lot of stories that suggest that back in the 90s, they were already talking to the government and stuff. Google has origins in a lot of this stuff. In fact, if you go look up IQT, InQtel, this is not a secret. They advertise this. This is the CIA's venture capital arm. Let me see if I can find it real quick. So InQtel, and you look at their portfolio company, they brag about all the tech startups and companies that they invest in. So this is the CIA's money going to fund the tools that they need to do global espionage at scale. So if you sort through here, and if you happen to be in tech, you might notice that a lot of the companies that you're applying to or recruited by are funded in this portfolio. And you'll also notice that a lot of these companies get acquired by Google and Apple and Microsoft and friends as the technologies mature. And you'll also notice that a lot of the founders of these companies come from MIT and Stanford and a lot of the big name universities as well. So and those universities get huge funding from the government for all kinds of things, everything and anything. And so it's all one big happy family, is my point. And so it's not like nobody knows about this. Like, look, GitLab, that's a pretty popular CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline for, software that a lot of companies are using and standardizing on for cybersecurity reasons. That's just one of many. I mean, and these are just all a bunch of little tools, not little tools, but like systemized tools that you could use in the cloud or with a lot of these tech companies for the cloud or for whatever. Look through it and you'll see what I'm saying. And so there's a pipeline going on from crave to cradle, or cradle to grave. Sorry. Where companies are funded, then they get angel or founded or something. It might start off at a university, and then it might get turned into a business plan from like Stanford or Harvard, teaming up with some MIT researchers or project leads, and then that gets turned into a startup, which then gets funded, then gets acquired, and then bundled up with 5 other companies to make a larger solution, and then systematized at one of the FANG companies. And so, anyways, if you're looking for a job, I highly recommend just go and apply to every single one of these. If you're a founder type, maybe you go and pitch to In-Q-Tel, because then you'll be in the network, and a lot of good things could happen. So that's enough said about IQT. Let's move on to, here's Google talking about what's next with Larry Page. And here he's talking about, he mentioned a lot of really good things in this particular. Larry Page talks a lot about artificial intelligence and some other really positive things here. And was this 2016? It was a while ago. But one of the things he mentions is like, hey, there was this time at Google where the government is coming and telling us that we have to do X, Y, and Z, and we don't even know why the government's all pissed off. It has something to do with terrorism. And now we're doing this, but not only for the government, but then now we need to protect our users from the government and vice versa. And which makes me more sympathetic towards the position that he was being put in at the time. So I'm going to show that here now. Let's do it.
What's been the subject here earlier with Edward Snowden, it is security and privacy. You have to have been thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw the picture of Sergey with Edward Snowden yesterday. Some of you may have seen. But I think, for me, I guess, privacy and security are a really important thing. We think about it in terms of both things. And I think that you can't have privacy without security. So let me just talk about security first, because you asked about Snowden and all of that. And then I'll say a little bit about privacy. I think, for me, it's tremendously disappointing that the government sort of secretly did all this stuff and didn't tell us. I don't think we can have a democracy if, we're having to protect you and our users from the government for stuff that we've never had a conversation about.
Right.
And I don't mean we have to know what the particular terrorist attack they're worrying about protecting us from, but we do need to know what the parameters of it is, what kind of surveillance the government's going to do and how and why. And I think we haven't had that conversation. So I think the government's actually done itself a tremendous disservice by doing all that in secret.
Never coming to Google to ask for anything.
Not Google, but the public. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we need to have a debate about that. Or we can't have a functioning democracy. It's just not possible. So I think, I'm sad that Google's in the position of protecting you and our users from the government doing secret things that nobody knows about. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And then there's a privacy side of it.
Yeah, so the privacy side, I think the world is changing. You carry a phone, it knows where you are. There's so much more information about you. And that's an important thing, and it makes sense why people are asking, difficult questions. We spent a lot of time thinking about this and what the issues are. I'm a little bit, I think the main thing that we need to do is just provide people choice. Show them what data is being collected. Search history, location data. We're excited about incognito mode in Chrome and doing that in more ways. But just getting people more choice and more awareness of what's going on. I also think it's very easy. What I'm worried about is we throw out the baby with the bathwater. And I look at, on your show, actually, I kind of lost my voice.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's some truth to what Larry is saying here, because if you were to go to accounts.google.com, so if you're logged in as yourself, you can go look at, it's actually kind of scary when you look at it, but if you go to accounts.google.com, you can see your search history. You can see all the data they're collecting on you, including the passwords, username and passwords to all the sites that you visit. You know how you don't have to remember your username and password to all the places you've been? That's not stored in just a cookie. That's stored in the cloud. And across browsers, across device. So Google can literally log into your bank account. Google can literally log into your insurance company or your mortgage lender or whatever, right? And I'm not going to click through here because I don't want to show you anything. But the fact is, it's there. So Google did do what he was saying, where they're like, hey, we're going to show you what we are collecting on you, and we're going to tell you about it. And then furthermore, if they periodically send you an email with a security checkup to let you know, hey, stuff changed since the last time we talked to you, and therefore the way we collect stuff has changed, and maybe you want to do two-factor authentication. Everything's going over through HTTPS, and maybe you want a download dump of everything we know about you. Facebook does that too, Twitter. There's some other things that are going on where, I don't know. There's a lot to say about that. That's for another stream. But in terms of, promises kept and promises or made and promises delivered, this is one of them.
And I haven't gotten it back. I'm hoping by talking to you, I'm going to get it back.
If I could do anything, I would do that.
All right, so get out your voodoo doll and
or
whatever you need to do. But I think, when I look at that, I made that public, and I got all this information. We got a survey done on medical conditions with people who have similar.
Yeah, so moving on. Next one. I think point made.
Seems like in our industry.
Here's Eric Schmidt at Stanford. I mean, those are usually a good video series. They like to go home for some reason and talk to the next gen. And so there's some good videos out of here. Here's Schmidt talking about the new digital age, the book he wrote. And that book was very surprising to me when I read it because at the time, I think he was the CTO of the White House. So he had a co-writer on it. But then they were talking, and this was in the Obama administration. And the other surprising fact was that they were talking a lot about things like Stuxnet and Iran and Iraq and Middle East and oil. And anyway, so here's Schmidt talking briefly about the new digital age.
We should define ourselves with a somewhat higher.
Something happened. Sorry about that. So, as you can see, he's talking about geopolitics and delivering phones to everybody. But by delivering phones to everybody, you're basically plugging everyone into the grid or the matrix. And that will extend the reach of global surveillance and all the problems that we're talking about on Facebook and Twitter and whatever. So that only highlights how much we need to sort out the Twitter files, the Facebook files, this whole Patriot Act thing. And just to sum up basically everything we've been talking about, it's like there's a lot of issues going on here. Sorry, somebody drove by. Go Charger, or Challenger. Go Challenger. As you can see, he's concerned about the world. So there's 7.5 billion going on 10 billion people, and he's worried about putting a phone in all their hands in order to continue the fun that we've been talking about with the developed world of about 1 billion or so people. And so now that we're on our way to, what did he say? 2.5, 3.5 billion people. That's about halfway. And anyways, the fun continues. So now that we have the receipts on all the Facebook stuff and the Twitter stuff and Google, but we had the receipts. For some reason, people are pretending like we didn't know this, or these was just conspiracy theory beforehand. It's not conspiracy theory. This is fact. These are careers. I made a career out of this. That's why I like talking about it. But I also don't want to get blacklisted either. So we'll see. I think we'll finish off with Sergey Brin of Google talking to Klaus Schwab at Davos 2017. And that's the scary part, is because these are the people that are involved in all this, and I hope, I wish, I want them to have be fighting for the good fight for all of us. But part of me thinks that they've been co-opted a long time ago. So let's see what they have to say about it. Yeah, so by the time we get to the World Economic Forum, things have gone horribly wrong. I'm super disturbed that these people don't represent anyone. Nobody elected them. These are the sovereigns, royalty, put them together and is funding the whole thing. And so the rest of us peons, as plebes, we the people just kind of have to listen to this and go well, what are we going to do about it? I can't do anything about it. And it's so big and it's so massive. What do you say about it? I don't know. So let's go out to drawing, and I'll conclude tonight's presentation, and I'll be back to you with some more. And hopefully I won't be so long in the next handful, but again, I would prefer to just present some information and people call in and talk about whatever people want to talk about. I'm interested in facilitating the conversation. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Have a good day. Who am I? But who am I? Hoorah.